Well, Shalom and welcome to our Shabbat night service. It is November 8th, 2024, and we are excited about this opportunity to go into lesson 3 of our lessons in the Torah, which are the first 5 books of the Bible in 1 year. So I want to thank you for joining, and I see that my sister is the first one to join us. Welcome, Mandaleo. Thank you for
Hey,
joining.
what's up?
All right. And so we're going to have an exciting lesson on tonight with a lot of information. We try to give a couple of minutes for everyone to come on. I have others that are sitting in a room with me, so they're also listening to the class. And so we're going to have a good time. I think my brother was telling me that he's just getting in from Florida. And so he's not sure. But anyway, when I went on, it said recording in progress. And so therefore, I believe that we will have it recorded and I will upload it sometime tomorrow on our YouTube channel. And so get your outlines ready as we are going to give one couple more minutes before we begin. We're going to be in Genesis chapter 12, verse 1, all the way through chapter 17, verse 27. And so we're going to really have a fun time. And so as you come on, feel free to jump in. Remember, we're going to break our lesson down into 7 different sections. And after each section, we'll open it up for questions. And so that if at that time we'll answer them. Now, you may have some during the lesson, but that's why we have the chat open so that you can put your question in the chat and then we'll pick it up at the end of each section. And as we go through the slide of the section, we're not doing it so that we read each word of chapter 12, but we're going to highlight some parts, and that's what our outline will help us to do. And so we're going to wait about 1 more minute, and then we're going to get started so that we'll get an opportunity to hopefully we try to complete in 1 hour. But since we have maps and everything, sometimes it goes about, I think last week it was 1 hour and 15 minutes. And this week, we have a couple of maps, but we're not, or charts that we're not going to spend a lot of time on it. But it is just to kind of acquaint you with something, some parts of what we're going to be studying on tonight. So we have waited long enough. And so we're going to get ready to pray and then get into our shared screen. And as those others come on, since you have to go into the room and to get admitted, it should say admit, and I'll get a chance to let you in. Hopefully I'll see it, the other part. So it'd be good if you got in close to 7. The closer to 7, the more likely you are to get in and be a part of the study. So you should have your outline and you should have your Bible so that we can get into our lesson. And we also have introduced you to another book called the Books of the Ethiopian Bible. And that's what it looks like. And we will be reading some of that from the book of Jubilees, which breaks down time for us since the beginning of creation in cycles of 50 years, because every 50th year is the year of Jubilee. And so when everything reverts back to its original state in the sense of the land of the people of Israel, and if you were a slave and had assigned yourself because you couldn't pay your debt or whatever was going on that caused you to have to give up yourself or your family and your resources, then the land and everything reverts back to that person at that time. And the way the economy was set up and everything was based on that 50-year cycle. And so there was an acknowledgement of that, and then that in this book called the Book of Jubilees, which was not made part of the Protestant canon of Scripture, in that book of Jubilee, we use it to add information to our study. So with that, we're going to begin our study with prayer. Father, we bless you for this day. We thank you for the Holy Spirit, the Ruach HaKodesh, that comes to guide us into all truth. We acknowledge that we are students trying to learn your word, to show ourselves approved, workmen not ashamed of our hire, rightly dividing the words of truth. Now, it's in the name of Yeshua HaMashiach, we pray this prayer. Amen. So remember, as we go through our lessons, there are 52 lessons that will get us through the first 5 books of the Bible in 1 year's time. So we're going to see if we can, in fact, do that and participate in that in this year's time. So now we're going to get into our shared screen. And I'm going to get into my notes. And we are going to move things over a little bit and get into our, we're going to go down to the bottom. That's why my granddaughter told me to do that. And we're going to get into our presentation. There we are. So we are in lesson 3, and it's in Hebrew, it's called Lekha. Lekha. And so that's basically going to be found in the first sentences of our lesson in chapter 12, verse 1. Now, if you look at your outline that was sent, there's a general overview that'll show us everything that's going to be in this lesson, Lekha. And the other aspect of how you study Torah is that concept, which means you yourself go, or you're going to make a decision, you lead, or you're going to do something, but it means you yourself go. All right. So throughout the lesson, we're going to see different instances where Lekha was at play. As Abraham goes into Egypt and comes back out, then divides up the land. So we're going to see where decisions were made based on that original statement from Jehovah the Creator, Lekha. And so in your general overview, you'll see that we're going to talk about how Abram and Sarah left their land, the land that they were living in Haran, and went into the land of Canaan. We're going to see that there was a famine in the land of Canaan, and they had to temporarily relocate to Egypt, where Pharaoh unsuccessfully attempts to add Sarah to his harem. So we're going to get into all of that as we go through Genesis chapter 12, verse 1, all the way through 17, verse 27. Then we're going to see that they're going to return to the land of Canaan, and they're going to have great wealth. So not only was Jehovah the Creator making sure that he protected them while they were there, but they also informed the Egyptian people of this Elohim that they served, along with they acquired wealth while they were there. And so then Abraham was going to defeat the armies of the 4 kings who had taken his nephew Lot as a hostage. We're going to see that Elohim is going to seal his pact with Abram and making certain that that land, he understands that land is going to his descendants. And so we're going to get into the whole understanding of the birth of Ishmael, and then leading us until later on, the birth of Isaac. And so then he's going to change Abram and Sarah's name and add the He, which is the letter H, which basically makes him now the father of many nations and her the princess of many nations. And so she'll become Sarah, and he'll become Abraham, rather than Abram and Sarai. And so with that, they're going to get into what? Circumcision, which sealed the covenant between Jehovah the Creator and Abram and his descendants forever. So the whole thing of circumcision at the age of 99, and how Abram then circumcised his whole household, and of course his son Ishmael, who had been born by that time. So we're going to cover almost 25 years of time in these chapters from Genesis 12, verse 1, all the way to 17. So we get into our first slide, and I just wanted to show you last time in Genesis 10, we went over the table of nations, which were basically the populations of all the descendants of Ham or Ham, which is in the green, which were the descendants of Ham. So you see that there's green in all kind of different locations over here in the land of Shinar and Ur in the Chaldeans, which is where Abraham comes from. So it was primarily the descendants of Shem and Ham that were in that area. Then we'll see that Shem is most of the yellow area on this map. And then Japhet, which was the third child of Noah, the three sons of Noah, which were the table of nations, and the third son was Japhet, and you'll see that's basically in Asia, Europe, and Eurasia, and further north. So all the land at this particular point in time of our study centers around pretty much Shinar, going up into Haran, and then into the land of Canaan. The second map I want to show you shows the traveling from Ur of the Chaldeans, which is where Abram's father originally left, and took him to the land of Haran as you follow the arrow. So he didn't arrive in Canaan from leaving Ur of the Chaldeans, because they settled in a land that was named Haran after the brother, his brother. So that land, the brother, of his father was Haran. And so it is from Haran that he heard the final message from that we're going to get into today, to now leave your father's house, which would be in Haran, and go into the land of Canaan, which I will show you. Although he just said to the land that I would show you. And then if we look at a map of today, we'll see that that would be parts of Iraq, up into Syria and Lebanon area, and then into the land of Canaan, which would be what we call Israel today, or the land of Canaan, which would go all the way into the land of Egypt. And so this is the kind of give us a background of what we're studying as we're going through our lesson in our sections on today, beginning in the first section, which will begin our study, which will be primarily from the verses of Genesis 12, 1 through 4, and then we'll skip down to Genesis 12, verses 14 through 20. So that's what our first section of our lesson is designed to do. And these sections are designed to, I see I got to get my notes out. People are turned up. And when I get into this full screen, then it covers up some of my wording. And so I have to get my notes out so that I can see everything that you are seeing on your screen. So now it reads that now Jehovah, remember this is the name that a Jewish scholar who was studying in a Lopa Codex was studying and found the vowels of U, Y, H, and it's WH, which is used in most Bibles to designate Lord, Lord in all caps. But it came from the 4 Hebrew letters YHWH. And so the correct pronunciation based on that study was Jehovah. And so now Jehovah, there is no J sound in either Hebrew nor Greek. So now Jehovah said to Abram, get yourself, that is that Lekha, get yourself out. So you yourself get out. So he's telling them, you yourself make this decision and get out of your country, away from your kinsmen and away from your father's house, and go to the land that I will show you. I will make of you a great nation. I will bless you, and I will make your name great, and you are to be a blessing. Verse 3, I will bless those who bless you, but I will curse anyone who curses you. And by you, all the families of the earth. It doesn't say just the nation Israel, but all the families of the earth will be blessed. Then in verse 4, so Abram went. So the biggest portion of our understanding of what is going on is that because he's called the father of faith, well, faith in the Hebrew concept always based on trust and action. Trust and action. So Jehovah says to him to get up and go, and then by faith, Abraham went. So then it says in verse 4, so Abram went, as Jehovah had said to him. So that's what the whole concept of faith is. It's in the word, and then what? Doing what the word says. So you can't have faith if there isn't an action involved in what you say you have heard or you're trusting in. So there has to be a corresponding action. So he's called the father of faith because of verse 4, he went. He just tells me, go and I will show you in verse 1. Well, then faith says, do something about that. And so he went. And so we get in verse 4, so Abram went as Jehovah had said to him. And he took Lot with him. He didn't tell him to take Lot, but because his brother Haran was dead, he felt responsible for Lot. And so he had Lot accompany him, but that was not, he told him, get you yourself. That meant his family, his wife, he didn't have any children, and his servants, because they were going to participate in this journey. And so we see then that he took Lot with him. And then it lets us know that Abram was 75 years old when he left Haran. Abram took his wife Sarai, and you'll see it spelled as Sarai because it wasn't Sarah, because the H hadn't been added yet as a special gift from Jehovah. So Abram took his wife Sarah, his brother's son Lot, and all their possessions which they had accumulated, as well as the people they had acquired in Haran. Then they set out for the land of Canaan, and then entered the land of Canaan. So then we go down to verse 14, and it says that when Abram entered Egypt, the Egyptians did notice that his woman was very beautiful. Now, in between there was a famine in the land. So in a continuation of his understanding, Abraham is traveling through the land of Canaan, and there's a great famine. And so then he goes down into Egypt. And there the Egyptians, he tells Sarah, his wife, upon going there, to say that because she is so beautiful, to say that she is his sister. Well, that wasn't necessarily the truth. However, in those cultures, if you were a close family member, which Sarah would have been, they could call you sister. And so it wasn't I guess you could say he didn't tell the truth, but he was trying to protect life. So he was trying to protect his life and hers as well. So Pharaoh's Pharaoh's princes saw her and commended her to Pharaoh. So they told Pharaoh that these people have entered in. Now, it's not just he and Sarah. There's a whole group of them coming in because of all the possessions and things that he had accumulated, but had never settled in the land of Canaan for any extended period of time. So all of that would have went with him into the land of Egypt. So then Pharaoh, they take her, just as he thought, and take her into Pharaoh's house. And then Pharaoh treated Abram well. In other words, he gave him gifts of sheep, cattle, male and female donkeys, male and female slaves, and camels. So we'll find then that on this particular journey, that great wealth was given to Abram, even more than he had, because Pharaoh took her and gave him like a dowry for Sarah. So part of what Abraham assumed was true, and that is she was beautiful and that they may take her. But Abram felt that if she were married to him, they would still take her, but they would just kill him. So that's what he believed would happen. So with that, he did that. But once again, Jehovah protects Abram and Sarah so that Pharaoh better not touch her. So Pharaoh understands he better not touch her because a plague comes upon his house based on the woman. So that would mean that the people that were the advisors to Pharaoh would then tell Pharaoh that the cause of what is going on, the plague and things that are happening in his home, was because of that woman. And so with that, he approaches Abram and tells him, that's not cool. You deceived me. And when we get into section 2, we'll see that they come out of that. But I want to read you something from the book of Jubilees, which goes into the time involved in this situation. So our text doesn't give us a time understanding. But when you look in the book of Jubilees, chapter 13, verses 10 through 13, I will read them. And it goes into his leaving the land of Hebron and going towards Egypt. And it says, and he removed from there and went towards the south, and he came to Hebron. And Hebron was built at that time, and he dwelt there 2 years. So the famine was great, but there was a 2-year period while he had set up residence in the land of Canaan. And then he went to the south to Baluth, and that's when the famine. So there was a period of at least 2 years of his wandering in the land of Canaan before the famine was so bad that he left. And then it says in verse 11, and Abraham went into Egypt in the 3rd year of the week, and he dwelt in Egypt 5 years. So it wasn't just an immediate thing of going in. No, he was living there 5 years. And it says before his wife was torn away from him. So he's putting on a good act for a number of years. But after 5 years, she was seen by others. He kept her hidden as best he could in the tents that they had set up, but she was seen. Since he in going in, he would have to kind of show everybody, but she would have her face and everything covered. But it was a 5-year period. And then in verse 13, it says, and when it came to pass, when Pharaoh sees Sarah, the wife of Abram, that God plagued Pharaoh and his house with great plagues because of Sarah, Abraham's wife. But one thing we wanted to, that wasn't given to us in our text, in our Bibles, is that understanding of time, and that there was a period of Now that would make what, 2 years in the land, 5 years, so almost 7 years had transpired, at least 7 years had transpired during this period of time. So now he's maybe 82, 83 years old by this time that Pharaoh had taken his wife. But the time of getting out of Egypt, not going to be very long because of the plague in section 2. He's going to tell him, get up out of here. You lied to me. Get up. That is not your sister. That is your wife. And because of her, you must leave Egypt. And we get into that. So in our first section, we get into the whole understanding of information that we have gained from looking at Genesis chapter 12, pretty much all of the chapter. If you looked at Jubilees from chapter 12 all the way to chapter 19, it would give you fill-in information about this time period of this whole lesson that we're going to be studying today, Lekha. But you can see once again that Lekha, he's getting up again and going into the land of Egypt, even though Jehovah didn't tell him to do that. But the famine was so great, he was scared he was going to lose his animals, the little bit of wealth that he had brought with him. So he goes into Egypt and there settles in, lives there, and is given all of these gifts and wealth, which we'll get into in section 2. So with that, let me see if we got anything in our chat concerning, I don't see one question. So everybody understands everything that's going on so far. Now remember, I'm believing that you have read Genesis chapter 12 all the way to Genesis chapter 17, because I'm not going to read all of that for you. So this information that I'm giving you, this is how you study based on what? Remembering things. So now we remember that the first section we studied, we had this situation where he left his land, came into the land of Canaan as he was instructed to do. And then what happened? Then he's challenged by a famine. And the famine becomes so great that he feels like he got to leave the land of Canaan and go into Egypt, or he'll lose everything he has. So there was an element of faith that he really isn't exemplifying here, but he's learning as he goes. And so as you get through studying Abraham and all of that, we're going to see that he went through 10 trials. They're called the 10 trials of Abraham, or 10 tests. Well, each of us in life, as we're studying this and we get into the application of it into our lives, then maybe we went through something where we were somewhere and felt like we were doing pretty good, and then we're told, go. Well, I know for me that went out a couple of times, but I thought I was doing pretty good in California. I mean, in Chicago, was getting ready to buy a house, a townhouse, had gotten married, was with my wife. We had a child. I thought everything was cool. And then all of a sudden I decide, wait a minute, I don't like the snow no more. I'm getting up out of here, because Johari, my wife's family, had gone and moved to California for the same reasons. But they had a lot more family there than I didn't. I just knew them. I didn't know anyone else in California, but I left and went to California. Then after being in California 45 years, almost 50 years, then I believe Jehovah told me to go to Georgia. Time for you to leave here. And I'm like, hold on. Okay, but what happens when you leave somewhere? A couple of things. Back in that day, 3 important things would happen. As you are journeying, you're not dealing with having children. And the second thing is, whatever you stored up, you're going to use that now to go somewhere else. So your business, your concerns, everything that you know, that changes. And then the last thing you do is you got to start all over in that new place. This is what Abraham had to deal with, and he was learning as with an application. Then I can look at the life of Abraham and say, wow, there are things like that that transpired in my life. Now, he didn't say just go. He told me to go to Georgia because there wasn't anywhere in the South I was going to go. And so he said, go to Georgia. And I was like, okay. But I mean, we're doing pretty good right about now, doing programs. I'm known. But we packed up and left. And right after that, it was a famine on our finances and everything else. And we've been going through it since we got here. But it just shows you that when you deal with application, practical application to things in your life, or Lekha, or making a big transition or a big step in life is going to bring you challenges. So with that, then we can go into section 2, which is going to deal with the fact that Sarah was taken. We're going to deal with the fact that Pharaoh's palace was hit with a plague. And I'm sure it was his advisors that said the problem with the plague, because Jehovah is making it known to him what's going on. You better not touch that woman. Okay? So since you better not touch that woman, then he's going to know. He's going to find out what's going on. Wouldn't do any good for this to be happening, and he don't know who's doing it and killing a bunch of other people because he think maybe they the problem. No, it was made known to him, just as it was made known to Abram that, look, this is what's going on. So Pharaoh, then we're going to see that, and he releases. Why? Because plagues make you change your mind. Some pain came. So he said, I don't want that woman, get her out of my harem. And so then but the gifts that he had given, he doesn't take back. Why? Because he understands the power of Jehovah, the creator of the universe. Now, all peoples believed in a higher force, shall we say. So they believe that the God of the land that they were in and what made them prosperous, that was their God. And that God is who they built their little shrines and their temples and did all that too. But when another foreign person came in, or a group came in, they would bring their own little understandings of who God is. But they would have to submit to the land, the God of the land that they were in order to be able to stay there, right? Well, the opposite happened in this situation because he comes in and his God overrules all of Pharaoh's God. And so Pharaoh is then like, this man, you get out of here, but that's a powerful God you're taking with you back to another land. So we're going to see that he's going to load them with gifts, and then they're going to triumphantly go back into the land of Canaan. But now he's more wealthy, and he got more slaves, one of which we're going to find out later, name is Hagar, who is going to be the mother of Ishmael. So we can make these kind of connections as we go through to section 2. So let me get back up into that. And it goes on, verse 17 to 20, and chapter 13, verses 1 through 4. And it says that Jehovah inflicted great plagues on Pharaoh and his household because of Sarah, Abram's wife. Pharaoh called Abram and said, what is this that you have done to me? Why didn't you tell me that she was your wife? Why did you say she is my sister? So that I took her to be my own wife. And so he did take her because he was the boss. He could do that. He did take her, put her in his harem, and probably was getting her ready. So what Abraham feared, in one sense, was true. Now, therefore, here is your wife. Take her and go away. So Pharaoh gave orders concerning him to his men, and they sent him on his way with his wife and everything he had. So he didn't take back any of the dowry that he had given to Abram for that, for his wife, but which he believed was his sister. Then we get into chapter 13, verses 1 through 4, and where Abram went up from Egypt. Now he's going back up from Egypt. Showed you on the maps how that kind of works. He and his wife and everything he had, and Lot with him, into Negev, which is a area down around the Dead Sea. Abram became wealthy with much cattle, silver, and gold. So Pharaoh had loaded him up, but he didn't take it back. But because Jehovah was so powerful and had put plagues on him, he didn't try to take that back. He said, no, you go ahead and take that and go your way and go and bless me when you leave. All right. So as he went on his travels from the Negev, he came to Bethel, which we call a house of prayer. We're going to see that many times throughout all of the travels of Abram, Isaac, and Jacob, the three patriarchs, to the place where his tent had been at the beginning between Bethel and Ai, where he had first built the altar, which you would have read about in chapter 12. And there Abram called on the name of Jehovah. And so even though Moses is writing and documenting all this information, some over 2,000 years later, it's still written as in the first, or as if it was happening at that time. And so at this time, Jehovah was the known name of the God of Israel. Why? Because he had told it to Moses, and as it's being transcribed by Moses, he's inferring that that is his name. So don't write you Lord or anything like that, put his name. So we read Jubilees chapter 13, verses 10 through 13. And this kind of brings us through the second section where we see once again, Abram is what? Traveling and traversing this land that he had been given. We also see that Pharaoh understood Jehovah, well, this God, the God of Abraham, was more powerful than the God that he was serving in the land of Egypt. And they're going to come back to that again later. And all throughout the scriptures, especially the Tanakh, the Old Testament, we'll see that there are different times Israel never did make like a complete break from Egypt, never. They were always looking at them as their long lost, for staying there 400 years, as their long lost relatives who would come and rescue them. And Jehovah kept telling them, stop doing that. I'm your source. But they would look to any other source they could find. So are there any questions on, let me go back to our chat and see if we have any questions. And we don't have any questions on section 2. So let's get through section 3. Section 3 is going to deal with Genesis chapter 13, verses 5 through 13. That is the section 3. And so we're going to find out that Lot, who had accompanied Abram and Sarah, was also independently wealthy. Why? Because Abram was sharing with him. He was considered like his brother. for his son. And so when Lot's shepherds then quarreled with Abram's shepherds, the two parted ways, and Lot settling in the province of Sodom, which was renowned for its evil, which was known as, which became known for its evil inhabitants. And after Lot departed, again, Elohim or Jehovah spoke to Abram again, reiterating his promise to bequeath the land to his descendants and promising to make his descendants numerous as the soil of the earth. So in section 3, we're going to see all this transpire in chapter 13, verses 5 through 13. Now Lot, who was going with Abram, also had sheep and cattle and tents, so that the land could not support them living together, because their possessions were many and they were not able to stay together. So there was a quarrel between the shepherds of Abram's livestock and the shepherds of Lot's livestock. So he had divvied up some of the slaves and other people that had been given to him as servants with Lot. Now the Canaanites and the Perizzites were living in the land then. So they were also sharing that land with Canaanites and Perizzites. And so with all that cattle they had and other people living on the land, it was just too much. So Abram in verse 8 says to Lot, please let there be no strife between me and you, or between my shepherds and yours, since we are relatives. Isn't the whole land before you? Please separate yourself from me. If to the left, then I'll go to the right. And if you go to the right, then I'll go to the left. So Lot lifted up his eyes and saw that the whole area surrounding the Jordan was well watered. So he just went up to a high plateau and looked down over the land to see which land, because Abram is giving him his choice over which land he would like. Abram the peacemaker. So Lot lifted up his eyes and saw the whole area surrounding the Jordan was well watered. This would be down there around the Dead Sea area in its entirety, like Jehovah's garden, talking about like the Garden of Eden, like the land of Egypt that they had been in, which was well watered by the Nile, and the famine wasn't great in the land of Egypt. He says, till you come to Zoar. So Lot chose for himself the whole area surrounding the Jordan. So Lot journeyed east, and they separated from each other. And Abram dwelled in the land of Canaan, and Lot dwelled in the cities of the valley, still in the land of Canaan, but in the southern area of Canaan. And he moved his tent from a place near Sodom. So he begins to settle in there and make friends with the people of Sodom. But verse 13 tells us that the people of Sodom were very evil and great sinners against Jehovah. So Lot is looking a lot more at the greenery of the land and not the people that were dwelling there. But he's going to come to find out that these people were very evil in the eyes of Jehovah. And so in the third section, we've gone through this particular area once again of what? Travel. You yourself travel. So here Abram makes the decision to separate from Lot. Now, he wasn't told to take Lot with him, but he did anyway. So Jehovah, why don't they start bumping out? Hold on, I got a question from Jerome, from Theo, and he wants to know, why did they butt heads? Because it wasn't saying that nowhere. Well, once again, if you have a lot of cattle, you need places for your cattle to graze, and the shepherds, well, in time that gets to be nerve-wracking, because you might be grazing your animals there and they want to graze their animal there. And remember, there's always the thing with wells, shortage of water, right? And so as your herds begin to get large, along with the inhabitants there, that's why the Bible said that the Canaanites and the Perizzite people were also living there. So now all of these animals are dealing with the water and they're dealing with the grazing land. So for that reason, then the ones who are watching over these animals are beginning to say, man, you know what? It's our turn to go there and get the water from the well and feed our animals in the grazing area. So you taking up too much time. So now you begin to quarrel, but Abram understands that this is not the time, not the time to want to fight the Canaanites and the Perizzites. So we gonna split up. You go your way, I'll go mine. And so that's why it was a good thing for them to consider and do, because it's going to get interesting if the Canaanites and Perizzites decide we don't want you here either. So now you're going to have a war over land that you were kind of a sojourner coming in. You were in tents, and they might have had structures built. But Abram always lived in tents. And so everybody that lived with him lived in tents. That's what shepherds pretty much did. So with that, let's go to the fourth section. Then it's going to talk about the war. The southern region of Canaan was embroiled in a major war involving many kings. When the dust settled, the victorious kings took captive all the inhabitants of the region, this very fertile land area around Sodom and Gomorrah. And so all the kings around that land area were going to have war, we read in the fourth section, with the kings of that area. So now it's always warring about land, possessions, and that's what always happens. So in this fourth section, we're going to see where Abram is going to have to then come to the rescue of Lot concerning what is going to happen with them losing the war and being taken captives as slaves. So we'll see that in this particular section, and we'll also see the first time they use the word Hebrew in verse 13. So in this fourth section of study, we're going to see once again there's traveling, or let you yourself go. So we're going to see that there's traveling going on. And of course, we're going to see that Abram had to go and get Lot and his possessions. So we're in chapter 14, verses 8 through 16. All right. Then the king of Sodom, the king of Gomorrah, the king of Admah, and the king of Zebolim, and the king of Bela, which is Zor, went out and lined themselves up for battle with what? The kings that are coming in from northeastern area that are coming in to that particular valley. Whoop. So they are going to war against Edolamor, which is the king of Elam, Tidal, the king of Goyim, and Amraphel, the king of Shinar. Remember, we showed you that that's all the way going all the way back over near the land of Ur and Chaldeans, which was the land from which Abraham's father had left a long time ago. So these kings coming in from that area wanting the greenery of the land of Sodom and Gomorrah, which we said Lot saw was very fertile, very green, and obviously had water there. So they came in, they had been paying taxes. They said they don't want to pay no more. And they ended up running for their lives because those 5 kings came in and began to have war with them. Now the valley of Siddim was full of tar pits. As the kings of Sodom and Gomorrah fled, they fell into them, and those who remained fled to the hills. So they took all that Sodom and Gomorrah's possessions and their food and left. So they came in, raided this particular area, took all of the animals and people that didn't kill or were hiding out that they found, and Lot was one of them. Verse 12 says they also took Lot, Abram's nephew, and his possessions, and they left. as he was living in Sodom. Verse 13, then a survivor came and told Abram the Hebrew. This is the first time that this word Hebrew was used to define who Abram was. And it basically is because he was from east of that area, which is where these people had come from that raided this area and took them captive. So he was dwelling by the large trees belonging to Mamre the Amorite, the brother of Eshol and the brother of Aner. They were Abram's allies. So he was friends with these people living in the area for which Abram was living. When Abram heard that his kinsmen had been taken captive, he rallied his trained men, those born in his household, 318 of them, and went in pursuit as far as Dan, which is all the way up in the north by Lebanon. So these people had come in and raided and took whatever they wanted all the way down into that particular area and was going back the northern route near up near Haran, which is where Abraham had originally settled when leaving Ur. And so when Abraham heard his household was as large as 318 fighting men. So he had gathered them to go and do war against these 5 kings that had come in and raided all the people and took the land, took what they had and was going back up towards Haran. He said then when he got up by Dan, which is up by what we saw on the map of Lebanon, then he divided his servants against them at night, and he defeated them and pursued them as far as Hobah, which is north of Damascus. So they hadn't got near Haran, but they were still up in the far north in what we know today as Damascus, and he ran them up there, and at that point left them alone. And he brought back all the possessions and also brought back his kinsman Lot and his possessions, as well as the women and the other people. And so this raiding party, this huge army of people that had come through that area and raided them, Abram went with his men, went back up in there and those people that they had captured and everything that they had captured and defeated the kings and ran them up past Damascus, which would actually be going towards the land of Haran, which is where he originally left to come into Canaan. So with that, that completes our section 4. Let's see if we have nothing in the chat. So we still don't have anything in the chat. Okay, so everybody's doing good. And we'll go to section 5. Now in the 5th section, we're going to be in Genesis chapter 14, verses 17 to 24, and chapter 15, verses 1 through 6. When we look on our outline, we're going to see where Abram took care of the king, told the king of Sodom, who he also captured back from them, and the king of Sodom wants to reward him with all the war spoils. And then we're going to see that Elohim Jehovah reassured Abram that he would be greatly rewarded for his righteousness. And Abraham now begins to speak to Jehovah concerning the fact that he doesn't have an heir. So all of this would be taking place in the first 10, 11 years of Abraham's sojourn from the time he left Haran to go into Canaan, and he had spent as much time in Egypt as he had in Canaan. So what is the point of this reward? Abram says, if I have no heir to inherit it. And Elohim assured Abram that he will indeed have a child and possess and promise that Abram's descendants will be as numerous as the stars in heaven. And so with that, we get into the 5th section, Genesis chapter 14, verses 17 through 24. Now, after he returned from defeating Hedorlamer, and the kings who were with him, the king of Sodom, went out to meet him in the valley of Shavah, that is called the King's Valley. Then Melchizedek, so now we meet up with Melchizedek, king of Salem, brought out bread and wine, and he was the priest of El Elyon, which basically means the Most High God. And he blessed him, meaning Abram, and said, "Blessed be Abram of El Elyon, creator of heaven and earth. And blessed be El Elyon, who gave over your enemies into your hand." Then Abram gave him a tenth of everything. It's interesting that when we looked on our lineage chart last year, we saw that this Melchizedek could very well have been Shem himself taking this building. So we saw that that was a possibility, and many scholars say that that's who Melchizedek is. And in other parts of scripture, it talks about in the Psalms, and then of course in the book of Hebrews, it talks about this Melchizedek having no origin. Well, if that were the case, to have this priest and this king, how did he come about? Well, in order to understand scripture and to explain that, they said that he was basically Shem, who lived after the flood. So the beginning of Shem would be then, of course, Noah and his wife. So when it says he doesn't have a beginning or an end, then basically the Jewish people say, well, we think that this actual person, Melchizedek, but they don't want to deal with, they're not dealing with Hebrews. They're not dealing with the New Testament at all. So even though the New Testament gives us more information about that in the book of Hebrews, basically for Jewish people who don't have anything to do with the New Testament, what we call the New Testament, then they say that they believe this person, Melchizedek, was in fact Shem, or which because his name means man, king of righteousness. And Shem would then be the descendant that passed on the lineage of righteousness down to Abram. And so for that reason, they say that they believe that Melchizedek was in fact Shem, who was the father of the righteous line that proceeds towards Abram. Yes, got a question, Cherie?
I put it in the chat, but you kind of answered some because I was gonna say I know many references in the New Testament talk about it being Jesus or referencing it may have been the Lord. I thought that's what they said.
Well, no, it doesn't say. It says he has no beginning and no end, is what it says in Hebrews.
Right.
Not doesn't say that in the Torah, nor does it say that in the Psalms. But this is information that we believe it was Paul who wrote Hebrews, even though they say the author is unknown. We think because of the depth of understanding that it was Shaul. So Shaul would then be getting revelation that these writers and these stewards didn't know. Because Shaul is bringing in revelation from that he got from Jesus concerning Melchizedek. That's what he put in Hebrews.
And no end could not be.
Well, that couldn't be Shem. Although, right, we know that Shem had a mother and father, right?
And God, he was always there. He's always been.
Well, the writer of Hebrews is inferring that that was a manifestation of God, which we understand to be Yeshua. But that's a revelation they don't have here, right?
Saying you answered it in the sense of why they believe that Messianic Jews. Well, I want to know what their standpoint would be on that. Since they're Messianic, they accept the Old and the Torah and the New Testament.
Right. Messianic Jews go with both. They said good.
It could be either.
It could be Yeshua.
Yeah, because I don't. If you can't say he has no beginning and no end, and refer to a man that was created, there was a beginning for him and an end. So how could that be?
Right. Well, that's revelation from Shaul concerning this Melchizedek, right? And that would be something that the Jewish people who don't deal with the New Testament at all wouldn't have any knowledge of. A Messianic Jewish person, a person that believes that Yeshua is the Messiah, then they can float, it can be either way. You can go with Father of Righteousness. In other words, God can do whatever he wants to do. So if he wants to manifest this person to come, not a problem. But for the Jewish mindset, everything has to be relatable to the earth realm along with the spiritual realm.
Right. I just can't go with both and be a believer in Yeshua. Because every created thing has a beginning and an end. Every created thing. The only thing that does not is God Yeshua. That's it. So who else could you be referring to? Unless there is a different meaning to this.
You're right. Getting into the depth of the scriptures is why people will say either or, this is what we believe, because we don't know. I mean, as you study and learn, more comes out. So we don't necessarily know it all, but as we learn it, we try to utilize it and give the information on to one another. And so that's why you would say that, yeah, I understand why you say he's the father of righteousness, right? And then the psalm also goes into Melchizedek as this father of righteousness, but it kind of goes into where we don't understand his beginning and we don't know what happened to him. Well, that's what the psalm is saying. Or Shaul is then saying or inferring that that's Yeshua. Right.
That's it.
Well, we wouldn't be mad with anybody saying that.
To me, that when I logically and spiritually, I'm like, that only one is Jesus, Yeshua. That's it. Who else? Is anyone worthy? Is anyone worthy to open this? No, just Yeshua.
Right. Good argument. We can't dispute that. Right now it's 8 o'clock and I'm only on the 5th section. Sometime later, verse 50, chapter. Okay, anyway, Abram gave a tenth of everything. Then the king of Sodom said to Abram, give me the people, a possession, take for yourself. But Abram said to the king of Sodom, I raise my hand and oath to Jehovah Elohim, creator of heaven and earth. So now the Most High God, Abram lets him know the name of the Most High God. My God is the Most High God. So that's what Abram is saying here. He says, I raise my hand and oath to Jehovah El Elyon, the Most High God, creator of heaven and earth, and not a thread or even a sandal strap of all that is yours will I take. So you will not say, I made Abraham rich. The spoils already belong to Abram. Abraham didn't want to have anything to do with the riches and the wealth of Sodom and Gomorrah. They were so evil. And he's going to have to come back later and intercede on behalf of these same people. So Abram says, I don't want nothing of yours. You can take it all, but those that went with me, those my countrymen that went with me, they'll take a share of the spoils. But for me, I don't want none of it. Right? So then we get to verse chapter 15, and it says, sometime later, the word of Jehovah came to Abram in a vision. Don't be afraid, Abram. I am your protector. Your reward will be very great. He had already proven to Abraham that he was his protector. And Abraham replies, now he's talking and saying, what good will all this wealth and everything that I have be if I continue childless? and Eleazar from Damaris inherits all my possessions. So he had already made his chief servant, Eleazar, as the heir for all that he has, because he has no children. So he has chosen this like cousin of his, or this servant of his, to be his heir. And so he's now saying, if I continue childless, and Eleazar inherits my possessions, he says, you haven't given me a child. So with all these blessings that Jehovah had promised him and told him to look up at the stars and see that all these gonna be your descendants, from is like, well, how is that possible? I mean, how are you gonna do this? What thing are you gonna do to make this happen? And so he goes on to say, comes to him and says, this man will not be your heir. No, your heir will be a child from your own body. So now he's telling him, the problem ain't with you. It's going to come from your own body. Then he brought him outside and said, look up to the sky, count the stars, if you can count them. Your descendants will be that many. And he believed in Jehovah. So once again, there's an action based on your faith. And Jehovah credited to him as righteousness. So when your behavior follows what you say you believe, then that is considered to you as righteousness. And so the same thing goes with us on today, that when we do what we have been instructed in the word that we are supposed to do, then that is considered to us as right action based on the word. And so you can consider that a righteous decision. So based on the fact that I believe I was told to leave and I left, I consider that as a right decision, no matter what comes upon that situation. If I believe I heard from God and then I follow that, then that is considered a testimony of my faith. And whatever happens there, you know, we find out as you go, just as Abraham was finding out things as he go, and now he's asking questions. In the 6th section, we got to get through with this in the next 5-8 minutes. In the 6th section, Abraham requests a sign that his descendants would inherit the land of Canaan. Elohim responded in the famous covenant between parts. So now we're going to get into the covenant between the parts, which is in the 6th section. The 6th section is very long. So I hope you read through that, which will be chapters 15 and 16. So we get into the whole understanding of where Sarah then is going to say, to Abram, that maybe the problem is me and not you, because the Lord has shut up her womb as far as she was concerned. Abram only having her as a wife was why he didn't have a son. But in understanding that if she gives Hagar to Abram to bear a child because she was really a servant of Sarah, that child would then belong to her. And so through that would, in fact, a child come to Abram. So we'll find that in this section. Verse chapter 16 says, now Sarai, Abram's wife, this is still in the 6th section, had not borne him a child, but she had an Egyptian slave girl named Hagar. Remember, that's what Pharaoh gave to them upon pushing them back out of the land of Egypt. So Sarah said to Abram, here now, Jehovah has kept me from having children, so go in and sleep with my slave girl. Maybe I'll be able to have children through her. Abram listened to what Sarah said. Because what? Oh, another thing that God has said is from you will come a child. But at that time, he didn't add the part that Sarah would be the father, the mother of the child. But he said, through your body would a child come. So once again, Abram is kind of weighing things and acting on what he is hearing. It was after Abram had been in the land 10 years that Sarah gave Abram's wife, took Hagar, the Egyptian slave girl, and she became pregnant. Then the problem was when she became pregnant, then she got the big head and began to think that she maybe take second notion that maybe this child doesn't really belong to Abram and Sarah as well as you, but no, this is mine. So anyway, then she acts up and Sarah goes to Abram and says, look, uh, you're doing something to mess up. This girl is messing up our relationship. And even though she's pregnant with your child, that is coming between you and I. And this is believed by most scholars that this was the only time that Sarah really had a disagreement with Abram in terms of decisions he was making. She followed when he said, do this, she did it. And she went along and went with him. But this is one time she said, hey, she's causing dissension in our relationship. But Abraham says to her, she's your slave girl, deal with her as you think fit. So then to complete the sixth section, then she runs away because of the way she's being now treated by Sarah. And an angel comes and follows her and tells her to go back. You will give birth to a son. You ought to call him Ishmael, which means God pays attention because Jehovah has paid attention to your misery. So he's basically telling her, go back and submit yourself to your mistress and obey. And then you will be blessed. So she's given instructions to go back and obey. And then she says that this is El Roi, or the God of seeing, that God sees. So one of the names that we have for Jehovah is El Roi, or the God that sees all. Because she said, have I really seen the one who sees me and stayed alive? And this is why that name El Roi came from really the slave girl's proclamation to Jehovah of who she was. Then it says Abram was 86 years old when Hagar bore Ishmael to Abram. So now that's 11 years. So 11 years have transpired at the birth of Ishmael, 5 of which we learned were spent in Egypt. In the 7th section, Abram was 99 years old, then now 86 to 99, 13 years. So by this time, Ishmael is 13 years old. When Abram was 99 years old, Jehovah appeared to him and said to him, I am El Shaddai, God Almighty. Walk in my presence and be pure-hearted. I will make my covenant between me and you, and I will increase your numbers greatly. Abraham fell on his face, and Elohim continued speaking with him. As for me, this is my covenant with you. Now, he'd already gone through the 2 parts, right, of the covenant. The covenant when he killed the animals and they made that covenant. He'd already gone through that, but now he's getting ready to add to the covenant. So he tells him, I will cause you to be, verse 6, I will cause you to be very fruitful. I will make nations of you. Kings will descend from you. So he's changed his name from Abram to Abraham, father of many. Verse 9, Elohim said to Abram, as for you, you are to keep my covenant, you and descendants after you, generation after generation. Here is my covenant, which you are to keep between me and you, along with your descendants after you. Every male among you is to be circumcised. So now the whole concept of circumcision being a sign of the covenant is now presented to Abram by Jehovah, the Creator. You are to be circumcised in the flesh of your foreskin. This will be the sign of the covenant between me and you. Generation after generation, every male among you who is 8 days old is to be circumcised. In the New Testament, we'll see where Yeshua was taken to the taken to be was circumcised on the 8th day. The slave born in your house and the person brought with you with your money must be circumcised. Thus my covenant will be in your flesh as an everlasting covenant. Any uncircumcised male who will not let himself be circumcised in the flesh of his foreskin, that person will be cut off from his people because he has broken my covenant. And so the whole concept of the circumcision is then made part of the covenant that Jehovah made with Abram and his descendants during this particular period in Abram's life at the age of 99. But before the promised son is born, circumcision takes place. And that's an important thing for us to understand as we're getting ready to go forward into our next lesson. And that is that what Abram did at that point, we see at the bottom is that Abram did that. He circumcised all of the males of his house, including Ishmael. So Ishmael, because of Abraham, made a part of the covenant. And so we see then that in our lesson for today, we've gotten through these 7 sections of Lekha, and we see the constant reference to you yourself go. And the faith of Abraham was when those things happened, he quickly acted. When he was told to circumcise, he quickly acted. When he was told to circumcise all of his household, Abraham did what? He circumcised all of the men of his house, and up until what Paul laid out with the understanding of Yeshua, even a convert that wanted to become a part of the nation of Israel had to be circumcised. They couldn't be considered as part of this covenant as a covenant people without circumcision. For the believer in Yeshua, Yeshua was circumcised on the 8th day. And so a believer in Yeshua comes under the circumcision of Yeshua in terms of the flesh circumcision, but our circumcision is also of the heart, which comes with the Holy Spirit. And so a believer in Yeshua doesn't necessarily have to be circumcised. If you want to, you can, but you don't have to because of the circumcision of Yeshua. And Paul breaks that down for us in the book of Romans. He talks about the fact that we were found in him in the book of Ephesians. We were found in him before the foundation of the world. So the circumcision of our flesh doesn't have to take place because right after Yeshua left, the argument was from the Jewish people for new believers and Gentiles was you still have to be circumcised. So Paul had to break that down, that was no longer a requirement for you to be a member of the covenant of the children of Israel. Only for believers in Yeshua. Remember, the Jewish people don't believe in Yeshua. Now, if a believer wants to get circumcised in that way on the 8th day, their children to be circumcised, that they can, but that is not something that they have to, in fact, do. With that, that completes our lesson. Thank you. Let me get out of here and see if I have any more questions. I got to get out of here. I'm going over time again. Only the question from Sharia. Okay, so with that, I will do what we call the priestly blessing for each one of us that have participated in our class on today. And it reads from Numbers chapter 6, verses 24 through 26. And may Jehovah bless you and keep you. May Jehovah make his face shine upon you and be gracious to you. And may Jehovah lift up his countenance upon you and give you peace. And with that, I say shalom. I will see you next week, and our lesson will be Valletta, and let me get the correct Genesis 18, chapter 1, all the way to Genesis 22, verse 24. So that's our lesson for next time. I will try to upload this on tomorrow and then get out our outline on Monday. Shalom, everyone, and I will see you next time.